Welcome, everyone. I'm joined today by Nathan McCullough, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Please, Nathan, tell me if I haven't. I know Nathan from my courses on Heidegger. He was just in one of them, and he gave a talk on, well, the difference between, I guess, self optimization of the human being, which is prevalent, and human flourishing. And Nathan also has a very, I think, relevant trajectory coming from philosophical work on Heidegger, and now he's doing something on the surface of it quite different to it, but with Heidegger always, or with an existential dimension to it. Questions of what it means to be human, what Dasein is, and how it plays out in our life world. So, Nathan, it's very good to have you, and feel free to just tell us your story, and then we get into the discussion when we're ready.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. Really enjoyed the course on Heidegger. It was sort of ignited a passion that I've had for Heidegger for a long time. That kind of the flame went out for a little while. But I studied Heidegger in undergraduate. Had a philosophy professor who was just amazing. Right? It's kind of one of those stories of like the movie with where he stands on the table. The
Dead
Robin Williams,
Poets, is it
Dead
Dead
Poets
Poets
Society.
Society?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a philosophy professor that was like that. He used to crawl around on the ground and like throw erasers, and it was quite a lively experience. And it was my first philosophy course was on philosophy of religion, and the my professor Jerome Miller, who wrote a book called The Geography of Suffering, and I think In the Throe of Wonder. We talked about this kind of transformation that's possible in thinking and the relationship between the transformation of thinking and being human. And I kind of got captivated by this idea that philosophy can be transformative. And so I kind of really entered in philosophy that way and did my undergrad. Ended up going to did a master's program at Kent State. Continued on with the tradition of Heidegger. I took some other courses, but I was there to study Heidegger in a lot of ways. And then they brought in a lot of the Eastern thinking as well. So we read like Religion and Nothingness, and this kind of Eastern and Western approach to Heidegger. And I thought that there was something in the balance between being and time, which seemed a little bit more volitional, kind of, taking a stand on your being, resoluteness in the face of, confronting death and meaninglessness or something like that, versus kind of the later stuff, which was much more about allowing and releasement, and much more listening to what being has to say, something like that, being given by being. And so I fell in love with that approach as well. And then, in 2008, ended up started a program at the University of Southern Illinois, Carbondale, and that's when a couple of things happened. 2008 is when the financial collapse happened. So essentially, a lot of the funding and stuff for a lot of the humanities was taken away, and I think in a lot of ways philosophy had gotten a little stale for me, because it was about kind of writing papers and going to symposiums, which I liked. I liked the dialectical part of going to if conferences and going to the pub and having conversations that were very lively. I liked that part. But a lot of the academic stuff started taking away the joy that I found in thinking and philosophizing. And then I ended up in 2000, somewhere around 2010, I ended up taking a personal development course called the Landmark Forum. And something very interesting happened, and that was the founder of the Landmark Education he had a program called Est. And when I did the forum, I had this kind of transformative experience. And I had this sense of I've learned something like this before. And I come to, the deeper I got into the work, I realized that the founder was deeply Heideggerian. He quoted Heidegger in all of the courses that we took, and very specifically, the temporality that was kind of under the work that was being done was very explicitly Heideggerian, and the idea of being. So the whole enterprise is about a phenomenological, ontological approach to kind of rethinking what it means to be human. And my love for Heidegger got ignited again, but in a different way. And so I got into, I'm someone who's been in long-term recovery from addiction. And I found a kind of a model in the personal development work that was being done in a Heideggerian way. I found a model for what I think I originally glimpsed as a young academic, which was the transformative power of Heidegger's thinking. And so that's in the last, I don't know, maybe last 10 years or so, I've been really exploring a phenomenological, ontological approach to both coaching and leadership, and then this, in the last couple of years, looking at potentially kind of creating a new model of addiction recovery that uses this kind of ontological, phenomenological approach, and thinking about this in terms of Heideggerian thinking, in particular temporality, who we are as human beings that's given. I think Heidegger rethinks time in a way that's has the ability to transform. So I kind of came in in an academic way, went out of academia into more of a practical approach, and then in the last year or so, in getting to see your work with a lot of other thinkers, John Vervaeke and some of the other people that you've been working with, it's just reignited a passion for Heidegger. And now, like you said before, I'm really looking at, in the world of coaching that I've been in, there seems to be this kind of almost compulsion towards optimization, like becoming even people will say things like, becoming unstoppable, becoming a machine, like this kind of more, and it's about like really optimizing. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that per se on the face of things in terms of like wanting to like achieve, but it does become pathological, I think, at some point. And I think my own addiction was driven by something like this as well. So that's kind of where all these things come together. And I think that I hope what we'll kind of explore today, and what I think Heidegger makes available, is this approach to what it means to be human that gets us out of our ego, if you will, our subject, and really takes seriously the project of coming back to ourselves and rediscovering who we are.
That's great. Can you, if you want, maybe say more on addiction just per se, and how that connects maybe with optimization? Also, there's so much in there. I have a lot more questions already, but that's immediately okay. Maybe very, very briefly. I came to philosophy through reading the Greeks and reading Roman thinkers at school, and so that was the foundation, and of course also a certain endowment that I happened to be born with, I suppose. But also I've always been suspicious about work. I'm not lazy, but work in the sense of work as a meaning, work as the content of our lives, work is our identity, the corporate career as who you are, the work-leisure dialectic. And what came with it was very early on, this is 15, 16, 20 years ago, I guess already, this came up also in Germany, that this entire craze about optimizing yourself, even if it wasn't called that, became very apparent already back then. And I've thought, at least, that to some degree in philosophy, or at least in academic philosophy, that wouldn't be the case. And there can be very good people. There are in academia. Overall, academia is not, I think, free to no fault of its own, I would have to say, from the overarching paradigm of our time. So, that's a bit of a connection here between you and I. And but feel free to maybe say a bit more on addiction in general. You can also, whatever you want to talk about in your own life, but also how that addiction and optimization, subjectivism, sorry, all of these, how they come together, how maybe Heidegger or a certain approach of Dasein analytic can break that open. Free to riff.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't made this connection before, but I think what you're saying is right. So I think in some sense we could think of this kind of compulsion towards optimization as an addiction. An addiction to production, and actually a losing of any particular self-identity towards, being identified with output in some sense. But I'll take one step back. So when I did the Landmark Forum, they did something which I felt was very important, which was the whole first couple of days. It's a 3-day seminar where you go through kind of identity level transformation. But in the beginning, they frame they call it the always already paradigm. And they frame human being as a response to, or that you are given by. They call it the sea of opinions. Okay, so if we think of Das Man, right, that the they, one thinks as one always does. And the way that temporality came in this mix is that who we are in the present is given by a future that we live into. That's how it's kind of cashed out. And then the other added thing that I'm not sure this is in Heidegger, so you can help me here. So the way that they frame it is that your past is always already out in the future, sort of standing in the future. So not only are you living into not only is the future coming back to you, giving who you are in the present, but your past is always already in the future. So you're actually what's giving who you are in the present is a past that you're living into. And that part of the work initially is to break up our identification with the they kind of thinking in such a way where you can take your past out of the future and kind of somehow file it again in the past, or relocate it again in the past in some sense, by getting what they call complete. And it opens up kind of a new, what do they say, a genesis of a new realm of possibility becomes opened up. And so the way that I connected this back to addiction first is that I realized that there are things sometimes that happen to us when we're young. And they become, as Landmark would say, they become incompletions, things that are incomplete from the past. And they are what you're projecting into the future. So without kind of thematizing it, you're living into these uncompleted kind of experiences. And I realized that for myself, and working and coaching with people a lot, that what they were being given by, I think sometimes today there's this kind of an overuse of the idea of trauma, but they're being given by these unresolved kind of traumas in that sense. And so the idea of kind of recovery, coming back to who you actually are, is this sense of getting complete about these traumas so that you're no longer living into them. And that's kind of what I saw was possible for myself, and actually did the work, right? So it wasn't a theoretical kind of semantic game that I was playing philosophically. This was my life. And so I got to kind of go through that process. And that's how I see, as I began to recover, the interesting thing was work began to take the place of what I was using prior, which is alcohol mainly. So I started becoming almost addicted to and compulsively working. And I realized that, oh my God, like even though you can resolve this other thing, something else emerges that I was kind of in reaction to instead of responding to. And that's what I've kind of realized in this last course that I've been taking with you, is that what's required is in some sense a response, an authentic response to our finitude, to our mortality, to our incompleteness in that sense, versus living in reaction. So that's the best that I can do in terms of like pulling those two threads together. But I think in a lot of ways the identification with kind of a cultural understanding of who we are as what we produce becomes almost like a compulsion. And I think the rise of ontic anxiety, if you think about it in terms of being in time, not the ontological kind of anxiety that I think is actually what can be disclosive of a new realm of possibility. But this rise of kind of anxiousness and lack of sleep, obsession with production, I think all of these things kind of arise out of some sort of preoccupation like that.
Yeah, and it's striking how time, I think, is probably often completely disregarded in psychiatry. I would guess this is just a wild guess, but it's especially anything that is what Heidegger refers to as ecstatische Zeitlichkeit, ecstatic temporality, where we are, where, what does he say? Herkunft aber bleibt stets Zukunft. Origin always remains the future, or is what you were describing as coming towards us. And this way in which we can, however, overturn, not change the past, but complete something of the past, so that what is coming towards us that generates the present becomes a good presence that isn't haunted by the specters of the past or so, as it's continuously coming towards us anyways. And feel free to interject anytime, by the way. And
I think the one thing I would add to that is that it does also in some sense transform the past as well. So there is like this mutual, exactly what you're saying. The ecstatic nature of time, I think, is really critical, because there is no past and future in that sense.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good, because I was imprecise then. In a sense, I want to avoid saying that we at will change the past as if it's just some data stock of self-contained memories or so, and we can at will change them. But to be more precise in what you were just saying, also, it's that through, say, in this language, becoming complete with ourselves, or Heidegger, I think, calls it being able to be whole, what is coming towards us is another way of recollecting what has been. Exactly. Which is not so. I want to avoid saying you can cut yourself off from what you have been. That's not possible. But the way in which it returns to you, the recovery, the way in which you rediscover yourself, that becomes a new one, a fresh one, and that then is coming to you. Would that be
100%? Yeah, you can never get rid of your past, and actually, you would never want to do that if you understood yourself as a fundamentally mortal and finite being whose meaning in life is given by that. Right? You would never want to cut off the one thing that makes you who you are.
Yeah, I want to. It's almost. I don't want to push it in an artificial direction, but something that's that I think is there, but it hasn't been named yet, or it did come about briefly when I think I mentioned the work leisure dialectic, is the question of how to be idle or non-productive, or at least not focused on producing even ourselves as outcome, where everything becomes a task or something to just a to-do list in our lives. So which is a strange way of being anyways, because you're kind of compartmentalizing or alienating yourself from yourself in some strange way. You can tie this in with your work if you want, and whatever comes up.
As soon as you said that, something struck me. So I did something called Vipassana, So, in some of the work that I've done, and maybe we can talk about this later as well, but recently there's been kind of a movement, excuse me, in the direction of plant medicines, ayahuasca, different kinds of meditation, things like that. So I have explored a lot of these different modalities because of the ecstatic nature of the experience, not in a sense to try to run away from life, but try to really come face to face with it in some way. And when I did Vipassana, which is essentially a 10-day silent meditation, no speaking, no writing, no listening, no eye contact with people. It really is designed to have you be fully idle, as you said, in that sense. It makes me think of Heidegger's notion of boredom as kind of this extension of time. But I was so confronted the first 3 or 4 days that I was there. I really was profoundly confronted by like a compulsion to do things. And just sitting and meditating for like 10 hours a day, I really got to experience. And I'm not sure if this is possible without doing something like a kind of retreat. I got to experience almost like a withdrawal from technology, from almost an incapacity to just be still. It's like Pascal said, that all man's problems come from man's inability to be alone by himself in a room. So I really was confronted with that, so much so that I was driven to literally relate to the meditation that we were doing as a competition with other people in the room. And my goal became to meditate the longest. And it didn't matter whether my back went out, whatever. I was going to be the last person to stop meditating. And I remember going up to the Buddhist, the monk guy that was leading our retreat by saying nothing. And I said to him, hey, I've had I had this breakthrough kind of experience. I had this experience where it was like all white light. I had an amazing experience, and I was excited about that. And he was saying to me, young man, you have achieved nothing. He was cautioning me that in Vipassana, that it's equanimity is the goal. To be running away from nothing and to be striving towards nothing, and to be in a totally equanimous relationship with the arising moment. And I had turned it into an achievement. And I was really confronted in that moment when he was saying to me, like, don't fall prey to the craving, which is the desiring of the pleasurable experience. That is meditation. Because in meditation, the more you strive to be in the moment, the more you're removed from the actual moment itself. And so as soon as you said that, I just got brought back to that moment where I literally turned this meditative experience into a competition. And that's when I really realized, my God, this will to control, or this will to compete, is way deeper than I had ever imagined.
And it may even come out stronger in a moment or in an exercise such as this, when stillness should take over. That's when it shows itself even more forcefully, because in the usual operations of the day, it's just what you do, what one does. But once you're supposed to let go, it comes out even stronger. There's something just very briefly on, because you mentioned Langeweile, and for those interested, Heidegger works this out in Fundamental Concepts of Metaphysics, where boredom is introduced as the fundamental attunement or mood of our epoch, of our age. The German word for boredom is Langeweile. The English word boredom, I think, and I know this from Lou, who's a member also of Halcyon, apparently boredom is used for the first time by Charles Dickens in Bleak House, of all novels. And so it's got very negative connotations immediately in English. But in German, that didn't used to be the case. Langeweile means long while. And a long while is 1,000 years ago, and for peasantry, the moment when finally there is nothing to do, and there are no time pressures, and time stretches out and invites to be at leisure or at peace with oneself. And it's completely turned, of course. Langeweile not just means also boredom. Horror vacui, the Kant refers to Langeweile as horror vacui. So the horror before empty, just to be horrified by emptiness.
Mm. Yeah, that's probably the one of the pathologies, I guess, of being human is to be horrified by that, you know, and be able to deal with that in a way that doesn't have you always like our being involved in things as a way of kind of receding from the emptiness of things, but also, like, you know, I think we've worked on death, you know, which is kind of,
yeah,
you know, I think that's very related.
It is related, and it's something you said before was striking also for me, this clear distinction between the early Heidegger and the later Heidegger, that the early Heidegger is more about confronting death, confronting finitude, confronting the finitude of time, and becoming resolute, decisive, etc. Whereas in the later Heidegger, it becomes an opening up towards, or letting oneself be opened to that finite occurrence and finite goings on of appearance, and perhaps sometimes even glimpses of meaning or so.
Mm-hmm.
That's also something I think that's important because, you know, when we talk about phenomena such as nihilism or the meaning crisis, etc., and you know, all these internets talk about the different pills you can take. I don't want to get into any of this here, because what this indicates to me is, again, just, you know, more addiction. Yeah. It doesn't matter which pill, it's just another addiction. And either you take that pill or the other pill, you'll be awakening to one thing, to one possibility, and then it's done. No, it's never fully achieved. It's not an optimizable process. I think this is something I want to work out as well here. What could be the difference between, and you can circle back to what I said before, what would be a difference between human flourishing,
yeah,
and self-optimization?
Yeah, I think it's right here in this conversation. I mean, I know that I was asking you before because I have an intuition that this is kind of something that can be a response to optimization, can be flourishing, which is to think about being human in its relationship to the whole community, you know, of humanity, as well as something that's much more holistic in a sense that it, you know, the who we are for ourselves is not any one particular way of being, but kind of the entire spectrum. And that, you know, understanding that things that when we are, that allows us to come back to ourselves in that way, where we literally rethink ourselves not as a subject that's engaged in things, but that is one particular mode of being that we can adopt, but it's not who we are. And it's interesting what you said before, and I'll circle back to this because I think it's all connected. There is a sense in which I think that the anxiety or angst, let's use that word, in being in time, if you don't get too sucked into the existential side of things, which I don't think is bad, I think it's a formal indication, right, from Formale Anzeige, which helps understand this deeper sense of anxiety that Heidegger talks about, which is, it works to reveal our absorption into the world so that we can kind of pull back out of it a little bit, right? But even in angst, there's a calmness that's there, that comes with the experience of anxiety in the face of death. There is, Heidegger talks about a calmness that comes along with this authentic sense of anxiety. And I wonder if that like the later movement of other Stimmung, right, these kind of attunements, it, you know, into boredom and into, you know, wonder and astonishment and what it comes in later, I think that the passageway through being in time, where you have to have this kind of initial experience of angst and death, I think that there is something that's revealed in that experience that makes way for the kind of attunements that come later in Heidegger's thinking. Because in being in time, it's really the understanding, Dasein's understanding of being, which kind of gives way into a deepening of the phenomenological experience. It's not a cutting off or a changing directions for Heidegger. There's some sense in which what he's doing is returning back into something which is more originary, that actually even the Dasein is given by being. So the attunement moves out of something that is of Dasein, and there's something, it becomes more primordial or something in that sense. You would know probably much better than I. But I think that there's this, that movement is important, that you do what is revealed in being in time, this confrontation with death, not as a biological fact and not even as an existential kind of I'm gonna die someday and allow that to inform who I am, right? There's something even more deeper ontological than even the perishing, the biological fact, and the existential. I think intuitively know that if you consider your death, it's going to make you more humble in some sense, right? That it'll give you more gratitude for the moment. But for Heidegger, I think there's something that's even more ontological about death that comes from being itself that I can't fully articulate. But I think that that's where I think the attunement side of things comes in, and I think that what he explores in being in time and angst, even though it goes away later, I think it goes away for a reason, not because he doesn't think it's important anymore, but the nature of the path of thinking has altered or has deepened in some sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's precisely also because of what you were just describing, which is when Heidegger writes the book Being in Time, this treatise, then there's these scholarly debates about there should have been a second part or maybe even a third part, and he hasn't accomplished it. Blah blah blah. It's beyond the point, because what happens is precisely this. It is in going through angst, and what you were just describing is that there's a breakdown of the ordinary importance of the world of the they self of Das Man. Mm-hmm. And the nothingness of the world reveals itself. He moves further towards death. Death is the utmost possibility of Dasein. It gives Dasein ever nothing to actualize. This possibility becomes the impossibility of the possibility of existence that keeps Dasein, and therefore its understanding of being, in this most intense moment, always in a certain way of swinging or abeyance. There's almost not a Damocles' sword, but in a really, it lifts up. It's the most intense passages, followed, of course, by ecstatic temporality, where Dasein is pushed, and Heidegger, as the writer of this, is exploring as he goes along what happens when we say death is the utmost possibility, and he goes through it. What would it mean to say that it's an impossibility of the possibility of existence when nothing is there to actualize? By the way, this is exactly then contrarian to the craze to optimize, which is only about enacting and actualizing and turning everything into an action, something that's actionable, etc. But on this much, much deeper level, it's exactly here in death that Heidegger, I think, begins to see that he has to give up on the project of being in time, which would have been a continuation of transcendental philosophy, etc., etc., etc. And the language that's spoken very immediately after being in time, and what is metaphysics and fundamental content of metaphysics, and the lecture course on Plato and truth, is already a language that's no longer academic at all. It's the das Nichts nichtet. the nothing annihilates. Yeah. Which in German makes, it makes sense. It's uncanny, it's unusual, but it's not gobbledygook. And this is also then where the Kyoto school scholars really become interested in Heidegger with these later, just not really later, but these texts where, so it's the intensity of death, this complete darkness. This is why, you remember this email exchange we had about death being the mountain range of being?
Yeah.
He says this. So he calls death later on, 30 years after being in time, he calls it the Gebirg des Seins. Gebirg is a mountain range, but of course with Heidegger it also means Gebirg as the concentration of concealment. So again, of utter withdrawal and non-availability. And once you begin, we begin to see this, it's everywhere. Death is absolutely everywhere. And I stumbled upon this in my own work, I have to admit. When I started the PhD, I had read Being in Time and a few other texts, and I thought that's it, what he has to say on death. And the more I read, the bigger the book or the project became, and I had to write on everything, because he calls death in the contributions. He says death is the highest testimony to being. He will say that Entzug ist Ereignis, so withdrawal is Ereignis, is the event or is a nouning. But also that Socrates, this is in a lecture course, which is what is called thinking. This is where he says that Socrates is the purest of all thinkers, not to say the greatest, but the purest, because he wrote nothing down. And that's, therefore, he says, Socrates was standing in the purest way in terms of all of Occidental or Western thinkers in this utter withdrawal of being. And that's what he wants to remind us of, that. Or this is what he runs. So you've really pointed to what happens in Being in Time, is this, he begins to see in angst and death. And I think this then relates to time. So because the past withdraws into, or that which has been withdraws into that which is to come, generating the presence, which can be an Augenblick or not, and then only to withdraw again, to come back and to withdraw. And those who stand in that withdrawal in a, firm way, or can stand within it, they can, rise above their own anxieties or so, in a more existentialist sense now. But in this very deep sense where Heidegger's philosophy is going, it really is in this moment of death, in Being in Time, that the project itself dies, as it were, and something else is born. And of course, this together with section 44 on aletheia, or aletheia, depending on how people pronounce it, the simultaneity of unconcealment and concealment. I think it's coming together, right? Death is becoming that utter moment of withdrawal and concealment at the same time. It discloses something about being itself. So that's where it is. Yeah.
Totally. I think it's amazing. And I think that when Heidegger talks about, that it's about the transformative sojourn, right, of Dasein between birth and death. That's what I get animated by, and what I think is amazing in your thinking. That's really reanimated things for me. Is I think that the same way that anxiety and death are so critical for Dasein to allow, or not allow, to have the everyday world literally collapse, and then the ability, the way that I understand resoluteness is like not then running into something else, but being with death in that sense, like the ability to stand in that moment, right? The emptying meaningless that gets revealed in that moment, to not go anywhere, but to authentically respond. It opens up the possibility, I guess, to respond instead of to react. And I think if we think about the kind of movement of Being in Time prior to Dasein, Now death can take on this kind of radical, transformative, I guess, role or something. I don't know how else to say that, for the community of mortals in that sense. So that it's something that we can all be gathered together around, an appreciation of concealment, an appreciation of withdrawal, appreciation of the possibility that we could not be. And that there's something that if you allow that insight to really come in, it reveals something that's very powerful, which I think at the end Heidegger would call astonishment. The humility and the wonder that comes with not needing to control anything. So that's where I think flourishing can come in. If you think of the four regions,
go there.
And who we are is given in relation to these four things, not as separate regions, but the gathering in the sacredness, or the kind of humility before the sacred, the divinities, I guess, and then the sky and the earth and mortals, right? You need all four of these regions to gather together, otherwise the whole thing doesn't work, or something like that. That's how I understand the kind of the Eragnis. But that's where I think the flourishing, if we come into an authentic relationship to death, it allows for the emerging of a relationship, of a way of being that is more holistic in that sense. I think that's kind of where the flourishing can be made possible, is that we can have a relationship to nature which is not controlling. We can have a relationship to the divinities, which is, not us trying to replace them, and not just us being determined by them, but the kind of the correspondence that becomes possible there. So something like that.
No, yes, all of it. I mean, it's very important not to try and, so the Gefiert, it's striking. So when we in the technological realm want to become godlike or even divine ourselves, it would throw off the balance or the equilibrium that can come about in the fourfold between, again, divinities, earth, sky, and mortals, and none can be without. By the way, also in Greek mythology, the divinities actually, they have no currency. They're never they can't be heroic, also because they're not mortal. They lack something, which is mortality. It's bizarre to hear some people say that we need to become like Prometheus or so. No, nowhere in mythology is this ever thought of as, first of all, as possible or even as desirable. It's the gods who yearn to be mortal. It's they who yearn to be human, not the other way around. The humans laugh at the gods because they have no currency, because they are just, well, this is a bit simplifying it, but they have a specific task, but they cannot really step out of it. So they lack even their own, what we consider human freedom. So what Gestell is trying to do in framing personality, etc., technology, let's just say, is to burst open or destroy, let's just say, the fourfold shape, the interplay of the four regions, leaving no region left. That means no world and no thing within the world. Nothing can light up in it. Then I think we're already there when we just try to overly optimize ourselves and the earth, for example, as a gas station or whatever Heidegger calls it, as that. And that's, and by the way, something else you said was very striking to me, coming from the German. You said being with death. I just wanted to point this out. I don't know if you are aware, I think probably, that in Being in Time, it's Sein zum Tode in German. In the usual translation, it's being towards death, which I also always say, but the zu, the ZU in German, so we can say, for example, Wirtshaus zum Hirsch. So that means a pup with the deer, or at the deer, or in, it's a weird way. It's Wirtshaus zum hier. So zum can actually mean with. So being with death is an appropriate translation of sein zum Tode. Maybe I think even a better one than being towards death.
Yeah, and I think actually what you're saying is important, because I feel like, and I'm not a Heidegger scholar, but I feel like a lot of what was missed. So I'll just put it this way. One thing just came to me. I read one book by, and this is not to, William Blattner, who's one of Heber Dreyfus's main students. And I feel like a lot of the work that they did was so important for understanding flow state and being immersed in experience and like that. But one of the things that made me realize there's something fundamentally off was the part about time and death. And I feel like this is part of the reason why there's such a misunderstanding, is this being towards death, and this kind of the directionality, and it becomes too willful in that sense, because that's not how I understand anything that Heidegger has to say. Everything is a with and a response, and it's kind of like sitting with something versus being towards it. But I think that's where a lot of these existential, the interpretation that he gave was that anxiety was like depression, and death was something else that was totally in my mind was representational. And it was like I just lost the whole. What that said to me was that philosophy had yet to become transformative for this person. There hadn't been the experience of what happens in being in time. Because I think if you have an authentic experience of what is being philosophized about, not as a conceptual thing, then you would see that all Heidegger could do after being in time is respond to what emerged in his own thinking in a way that led in a different direction than what was structured out from the beginning. I'm not sure if what I just said made sense.
No, of course. So it does. And I'm just going to add, not being a Heidegger scholar probably helps. No, seriously, probably. It does. So I've mentioned this before in other places. I'm an autodidact when it comes to Heidegger. My my PhD supervisor taught a course for bachelor students, and I said to him in my first year, I said to him, I'm going to just listen if that's okay. He said, yes, of course, but you've taken so many Heidegger courses by now, there'll be nothing new. And I didn't tell him at the time that I hadn't done any course on Heidegger before starting the PhD. I read Being in Time on my own. It took me 3 years. I didn't understand a single word. And without having understood anything, I wrote my PhD proposal. I have to tell him someday that this is how it was. And I think, frankly, not having read anyone on Heidegger and having read Heidegger only on my own, it probably helped just not being caught up in the cobweb but this is Being in Time, and there are all these scholarly problems that, but why didn't he continue, blah, 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 blah. And this is such a big break. None of this is relevant, because what's relevant is, and we just listen, just cut through all the noise. What does he say himself about some of the texts? And he says, just to refer back to what you were just saying, that he makes an experience in his thinking. He keeps coming back to that notion. And he keeps coming back also to another very important notion that we have forgotten, which is very recent development, which has to do with academic philosophy. And that's why I'm critical of it, which is to think of it as purely a theoretical exercise of trying to win an argument, which is basically, and this is my view, I'm speaking for myself only, not for Nathan, anyone else. I think that's sophistry. I think that's ultimately sophistry. Plato doesn't sit down and wants to win an argument about the theory of forms, which he doesn't have. Plato responds to the idea. in the way in which he can articulate it, and it's a response to it. By the way, Nietzsche, because you made this very important distinction between reaction and response. A response is not a reaction. Nathan, I want to stress this again so people can pick up on it. To respond is not a reaction. Nietzsche says in a posthumously published note, which unfortunately is not yet available in English, he says, we are all reactive talents. Scholars, journalists, historians, scientists are all just purely reactive, reactionary even, reacting to stimuli from without. And philosophy, even someone like Hegel still, when he presents his philosophy of spirit or philosophy of history, it's not some theory amongst others. It's trying to articulate the truth of the world. And speaking from the heart, Hegel did, and certainly I think Heidegger did in some of his lecture courses, but not sort of trying to group up with the right team, whatever they were, William Blattner, etc., and trying to win academic arguments, but responding to something, not responding to the paper from someone else, but responding to the question of the day. That's, I think, what's lost. So this is why the more relevant or just closer to anything things happen outside of it now, I think. Is that just my opinion? So I'm not speaking for you, obviously, but
yeah, no, I mean, I think if you look at social media and the world that we live in, everything is a reaction, and I think it's almost like an obsession to react. I mean, from somebody like Will Smith at the Oscars, and all of a sudden it's like Slapgate, and things become so. I don't know. I just find it extraordinary that that's what life has become in a lot of ways, is a reaction, and what's needed is a response. And that's why I think what you've been doing is so important, because it kind of clears the way, or it creates a path for a response to emerge that is not also a reaction to technology. As the Gestalt, as our epoch's kind of prevailing way that being is revealed in technology, what we cannot do is react, because that will not clear the way. There's no being with technology in that sense. The Heidegger talks about creating a free relationship with technology in a way where something else is revealed. Nothing can be revealed if you've got your hands on something's neck, or you're trying to control it in that way. And that's why I think a lot of what you're doing is so important.
Thanks. I think though, maybe briefly on technology, you can say whatever comes to mind for you. Just very briefly, when Heidegger speaks of technology, maybe a better translation is technics. It's more to do with in the easiest way I can say it doesn't capture everything, but that's enough for here, I guess, because then we would have to go into the details of Gestalt, etc. Is a way of interpreting and understanding the world that's purely technical, and that, by the way, ties it back to self-optimization instead of perhaps finding ways to flourish with and thanks to the ways in which we are and what we need, what are fundamental human needs that are genuine, not wants and desires, but needs. And so it's a technical self-interpretation and a technical world interpretation. To give a concrete example, it means to look at the world from the perspective of an Excel sheet. So, yeah, I mean, there's an example here in England where in the north somewhere, they're planting, they're cutting down trees, old trees, and planting new trees that are foreign to this island, but they grow faster. So as per the Excel sheet, there's no difference. the forest is still there. There's 100 trees cut down and 100 trees added. There's no difference. But there is a difference because the trees are not used to this climate. The soil is not used to those trees. Of course, the soil changes when you cut down 100 old trees. The entire landscape changes. But on the Excel sheet, there's no difference. That's a completely technical way of understanding oneself, because we are with the forest also, whether we like it or not. And also, of course, of the landscape, the land in which we are and from which we dwell, I think is a weird way of putting it, but maybe it captures something. So, and the opposite, of course, would be to flourish, because in order to flourish, to blossom, to bloom, you cannot will it.
Right.
You cannot will. I mean, you at this point, I guess we can will a few weird things, but we cannot just will for, roses. Can you just open up now? No, it won't. It will come in its time. Maybe we can, twist a few things in its DNA or so. But that would be, I think, maybe a simple way, or a way of opening this up, what Heidegger means to a large degree by Gestell and by techniques.
Yeah, and I think the thing that helped me understand this was the example of, even if it's a character, I don't know if it is or not, right, but of transhumanism and this desire to be kind of not bound by time and also not bound by death, right, not be mortal in that sense. And that's kind of the taking the technological way of thinking, not about technology, not about devices, but as a way of representing things, all the way out to its, I don't know if logical conclusion is the right way, but the nuclear bomb, I guess, kind of end of it. And that's why I think the idea of time and death is so important, because it can create a response to that response us to what, the name of the paper that I was writing was Accomplishing Mortality, because Heidegger says we have yet to become mortal. And I think it's the relationship to time and death that allows us to become mortal as a response to what is revealed in the total technological thinking that is in our time. So that's kind of how it was all coming back together. And I just want to read one quote, because this is something that So Heidegger says to accomplish means to unfold something into the fullness of its essence. I don't know if essence is the right translation, but to lead forth into this fullness. Therefore, only what already is can really be accomplished. And that's why I named the paper Accomplishing Mortality, because our finitude and our mortality is something that's built in, but it's something that has not been revealed yet. So if and when we have the proper response to the technological way of thinking in a way that reveals a new way of being that is, let's call it flourishing, where we're in this proper correspondence with sky, earth, and divinities, then what happens is we've accomplished what we are as mortals, right? We're being led into our fullness by following this kind of what's being revealed newly. So therefore, only what already is can be accomplished. And the way that this has kind of been cashed out in my mind, at least, is like the statue of David. Right? He said that when he was chipping away at the statue, David was always already there. And what he was doing was responding in a way where, he was chipping away whatever was not David. And what's left is what is always already there. So that's kind of where I was going at with what I was thinking in terms of the paper of becoming mortal or accomplishing in this Heideggerian sense. to unfold something into the fullness of its essence, or what it always already is. And I think that the achievement of mortality that Heidegger talks about is a returning, if I can put it that way, to the of the human being to that which it always already is, was, has been, to be. You know, something like that.
Yeah, really, because and this is in Aristotle's metaphysics. Very often, when we read it in English translation, I guess the same is true in German translations or other languages. It will say, the translation will say essence, where the Greek text says to ti en enai, which could be translated as that which was to be, or that which was being. So here we have to ti en enai. To, what? Tien, what was. Enai is the verb to be. So that which was to be. Again, essence is, we're so used to say essence for what something is, that we lose the temporal, we overlook the temporal dimension to it, that already, that Aristotle clearly sees and speaks about in this untranslatable sentence. It is almost untranslatable, I guess, but we can have approximations to it. That which was to be, that which has been, is what it means to be. Perhaps we could say, in a sense, it makes more, in a translation that makes more sense for us here. So that which has been is that which continues to be, and as such is what it is. But it's not a given. It's not, so you're not, to quote my teacher from Italy, to be human, Ivo de Gennaro, to be human is not a fact. It's a job. It's a task.
To be accomplished.
Yes, it is something to be accomplished, accomplire, to come into completion with, to come towards completion. We could actually say accomplire, but also, what we can quote Master Eckhart: "Why do you go out? In order to return home." Every hero story is about having to go out to transform oneself, to return, and to return anew, but to come home. And so, the subject is that this is the human being, this unit, and it has all of these features. And then we can just squeeze and optimize, blah, 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 decrease this, increase this, optimize that, and get rid of this entirely. But that crowds out the entire journey. It is even less than linear at this point, the temporality that's in place here. It's just stasis. It completely, so yes, we're mortal. That's it's banal. It's banal to say this, but once you start, but so much of philosophy is banal in some sense, right? Just nothing annihilates, or Heraclitus, the one is many and many is one. That's banal, but it's not. But it isn't that banal when we start thinking after it and try to articulate it, and try to articulate what it means to be human and mortal and aware of that finitude and having to die. That just explode, or can explode, and flourish into, our journey, I guess.
Well, yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I think in a lot of ways that's why the future, right?
Yeah.
Is when you separate it and you put it out, out there. Anytime you have a relationship with the future in that sense, you've already missed what I think Heidegger points at as what makes us most who we are, is something that is to come, but which is it's always already been, right? So that's why when Heidegger talks about a return to the Greek thinking, it's not a point in time in which people thought about things a particular way. That because that everything is simultaneous, this mutual arising of everything, there's something that's lodged in there that's kind of a glimpse of kind of what it means to be human, and so that the future has to be in some way a memory, or we're remembering, we're remembering or recollecting in that sense things.
Yeah,
I
that's,
don't,
yeah, no, exactly. That's no, that's this the future as something we recollect, and I think there's so much confusion out there about the future, because there are some wizards out there who talk about the future causing the past, and it's actually just Aristotelian metaphysics misconstrued. And it sounds very, catchy, etc., but it isn't all that unusual when you know anything about scholasticism or Aristotle's metaphysics, potentiality, actuality. It's just it is an inversion of it, and this recollection of the future is a recollection of that which is to come, to be closer to the German Zukunft. Mary Shelley, in her book, I'm looking, where is it somewhere? Mary Shelley, in her book, The Last Man, is a book from 19th century Victorian times in England. Doesn't say, uses the notion the to come instead of future, the to come. And there is something in the air about the future. It's obvious, there's a drive to try and control the future by designing it.
mm-hmm.
So it's a blank slate. But what you're describing is on point again, because I think what you were saying is that is not a relationship to the future. It's already gone in that moment when we try to control it.
Yep. And I think that what you just pointed at again is kind of bringing it back to the insight that I was trying to get at in my paper as well, which is this idea that we are self-made, or we're self-created, and that optimization is kind of like this will to be a creator, and that in a lot of ways that is why not being related to death is so. This type of thinking is just the way that it had to have come this way, because only someone who was not related to death could possibly think that they could be a creator in that sense. Creation ex nihilo, creation in the sense that I am the creator. And because what death, I think, reveals is this space of freedom and creativity that is bounded and makes it what it is. And without that kind of boundedness, the freedom, it doesn't make sense to talk about freedom, because freedom just becomes this, this limitlessness. And creativity there's no groundedness, there's no earth to it, I guess, in some sense. And that in order to be really free, in order to be really creative, you need the death to be that limit. So that, like Heidegger says, we're thrown projection, or we're thrown open in a way which we can never get behind our thrownness, and we can never get beyond our death. And that there's something in that which, if we respond to it accordingly, or we listen to what is being said in that it will allow for a whole new sense of freedom and a whole new sense of creativity that will allow the future to be some other way.
It's striking how you bring this all together now. For me also, because that's one of my main projects at the moment, is writing a book on memory, and I'm speaking a lot with people on their ideas about memory and recollection, etc. And just very maybe briefly, I don't want to, maybe we can maybe continue this then in that direction some other time. But as you know, so many dystopian science fiction films deal with memory in a sense of a standing reserve or a standing resource. It's something that can be implanted in your mind. It's something that can be changed arbitrarily. And I don't know if you've seen the newest, what was it? I always remember, no, Blade Runner, I think. There are people there who make memories. They make memories for the replicas because without memories, they would not be able to live. So they have fake memories implanted in them because that's what makes them more human, is to have fake memories. It's very terrifying. It is. So this is why, when we say we can alter the past in some way, this is where we have to be very, I think one has to be very careful to distinguish this relationship with one's having been from this crude and framing technical way of just producing fake memories to achieve a result in one's mind, to program people basically, and or to alter, to try and control the future, which leads to a collapse of the future altogether, which means, I think you said it, I'm paraphrasing a bit, which means, to simplify it, which means to collapse a space or dimension of meaning altogether, because nothing is affording itself anymore or coming towards them, but it's done. It already has occurred. It's dead before it happens. Weirdly enough, going together precisely with a rejection of death and finitude. That's what's so striking to me.
Yeah, and why and with no relationship to death or time or this kind of limitation, that's why the need for the I guess the felt need for the manufacture of meaning arises. Because it's not given. It's not given, and so it's almost like I need to create something. Instead of recognizing that it's not, there's nothing that needs to be created in that sense. And that's why what you were saying before as well, it's not about altering the past. I think it's because everything's mutually arising and simultaneous, there is a different way that the past can be revealed. But you don't alter the past as if what you're going back and doing is altering some state of events, right? Because that's already a non-generative, I guess, sense of the past as events or facts of the matter that you're somehow changing. No, it's when there's an authentic relationship to death. What's revealed is something. Maybe it's an altering the way that something is revealed. That's how I understand what Heidegger is doing when he's listening to the Greek thinking. It's something else is revealed. That's how I understand why he's doing that. It's not to hearken back into some, golden age of being human where we had more of a relationship to whatever. It's literally allowing something else to be revealed. And I really think it is something like our relationship to death is what allows for something else to be revealed that was always already there.
That was always already there, that doesn't need to be manufactured. And to pull out one of the weirdest thoughts that you've uttered, which is a crucial one, precisely for its uncanniness, because we're not used to it, is the which was also in relation to the Greeks, the simultaneity of it all. They're not 2,500 years ago. The thought carries on, and it bubbles up and bursts now. When we listen to the text, read the text, take, whatever happens in our weird minds when we relate to them. And even if we don't, Nietzsche has this weird quote where he says, this is in the Zarathustra, thoughts that come on dove's feet guide the world. And so, no one may have picked up on anything that's been thought, but it can be something that guides the world. But it also on the manufacturing of meaning and memories, etc., that ties in with this, because what this wants to do, this operation, it wants to make available what isn't available. It wants to make a resource what isn't a resource. And it has to be, and this is what's so striking about it, it is parasitic. It's parasitical on, let's just say, the real, the genuine, the authentic. And it needs it. This parasitical operation needs the real. The less that it has any connection to it, the more obviously fake and simulacrum-like it becomes. but it needs to be a replica of something that's genuine. So once it completely crowds out, destroys or desertifies the layer of the real, it becomes impossible itself. It's destroyed itself. Because what can it produce?
So
What
are you saying it like kind of sits on top of it and sucks all of the energy out of it?
Yeah, I mean, so look, it's silly to always, and I shouldn't do it because it gets, but the Matrix film is good for actually, I think, showing how even a critique of this entire, and it's a failed critique, right? Because the Matrix films just reinforce what they purport to critique, but it sucks it out. Yes, it's on top or beneath or wherever it is, and always pulls. And this is, something that struck me a lot when I was younger. Now it's so ubiquitous, I just don't even try not to see it anymore. Real food. Authentic Italian food, really. Or even though I remember my grandfather once, this is in 2006, he was sitting, he was already quite old, and my family's from Bavaria, and he was drinking a beer from Munich that's always been brewed in Munich for hundreds of years, and at some point he noticed and said, original Bavarian beer. And he said, it's so strange that, what else should it be? Why does it have to announce itself as original? It wasn't the case even maybe 20 years before that. So it's all this, I just try to point out that it doesn't just have to be in the metaverse or on the internet. It can also just be, again, in our relationship with the world. It doesn't even need the phone as an intermediary there. It's our relationship to our having been that can already be that distorted that we lack an access to it. That's already so parasitical, and no longer one that's lived, perhaps, but also just to some degree manufactured. And to break out of that's I think obviously the difficulty, but also that is a task, I say.
Yeah, I remember, I don't know if this is actually even the point, but in The Matrix, I remember the one thing that I forgot most of the movies, but one thing that I always stuck out to me, and it came back to me again actually when we were in the course this time, when you were talking about the fissures of being, right? These kind of traces that still remain, that allow something else to be revealed. And I remember thinking to myself, what if you were walking along and you saw even if it was just one momentary glance, and you saw a crack in the matrix? It's like, how striking, and like, oh my God. And then it just closes up again, right? And so you're kind of going along in life, but it's there, that kind of idea where you saw a crack in the matrix is still there. And that's how I think of this kind of like this fissure, this trace where, it reveals itself in, even if it's just a little sliver, but it has still there the possibility of bringing, of the collapse of the buying into the illusion, I guess, if you will.
Yeah. There will be fissures within it. It can't be without the fissures themselves, because it always needs itself to break down at some point, sometimes, to be connected again to the real or the uncontrollable. Maybe I'll just say the non-controllable, or the non-available, that avails itself when it wishes to do so, but not when we want it to be so. And I think it's beautiful to say that the fissures of being are traces of what used to be, of what has been, and maybe now it makes more sense that Heidegger says death is the mountain range of being through which we stride, and through its fissures, cleavages, edges, cliffs, and valleys, of course, also.
Yeah, that's why I've always something's always bothered me that's always come up, and it's like part of like I get frustrated in the past was people would be like, they would look at Heidegger's reading of other philosophers and they would say, well, that's not what they said. And I'm like, who cares? That's not the freaking point. You know, he can reread Sophocles how many times, you know, and Antigone first is unrooted and she goes out, you know, and then the second reading, it's a totally different reading. And it's like, which one was the correct one? It's like, that's not the point. The speaking and the saying is not designed to be getting at what, you know, what was even meant at that time. It's this constant being with and listening for what is being said, not in the sentences, but in the experience and the like that. I've always wondered why people get so hung up on, well, that's Heidegger's just reading being into, you know, Leibniz or whatever. It's like, oh my God.
Well,
he wasn't trying to be scholastic, I guess, in that sense. I don't know.
Well,
maybe
that too, but also, and this is maybe for another discussion, but I would have to say to this, Heidegger can read ancient Greek just like you and I would read English. And he can read Latin, and he was familiar with French and with English, and he was a pretty good German speaker. And many of the, this is a bit of a, you know, but many of the people who will say this don't know either of these languages well enough, except maybe for English. Yeah. So I'm always a bit worried when someone who's went through maybe some Californian university and did not spend decades before even going to university studying Greek and Latin and all that comes with it, going to a certain type of high school in Germany, will just, you learn a few different things. And Heidegger has this warning to the scholars. He says, you should read me after you've read Aristotle for 10 years. That's to the scholars, not to the layman. Very important. Mm-hmm. And I think once they've done that and they can read the Metaphysica in the Greek without having to translate, then perhaps they can say that. Because what Heidegger carves out in the languages is, in these texts, and from early on with clear reference to Plato's Sophists, by the way, is a way in which to overcome the aporia of our time through a referring and relating back to that which has been thought but remained unthought in the tradition. And to deny that that's possible is to deny philosophy, because that would mean that all of philosophy is just always saying the exact identical stuff. No, they're all trying to say something of the same, but in the way in which being unfolds, will say it differently. And they are responding to, in that sense, to being and its epoch in the language of their time. And so I would just be, I would say, because then why is Hegel's interpretation of Parmenides acceptable, but not Heidegger's, for example, right? Where Hegel might also deviate from what some people are saying about it, but also I think it really comes down to often a certain failure of language and the very quick translations we've seen from German into English, which are there very often to integrate Heidegger's thinking into an already available discourse that's academically controlled. So instead of just not saying, as he says, this is a quote from Heidegger, he says, Ereignis is not translatable. So it becomes the event, because that's what it means in a dictionary, no questions asked, blah, blah, blah. And an entire industry, develops. But it's, I think, what's striking that Stambaugh, who translated this text where he says this, the so-called principle of identity, she omits this sentence. So this sentence, which is in the German original, is completely omitted by her. And that, she omits an entire paragraph where Heidegger says, you can't translate it. It's the meeting place of being and the human being. It's a realm. All of this gone. It's the event. period. And again, because then it's already known, it loses the weirdness that every philosopher has. And by the way, on this notion of responding, the first sentence of the first edition of Kant's first critique reads as follows: human reason has the peculiar fate to be addressed by questions it cannot hope to answer. So, Kant says that we are addressed by something. What is it? For Heidegger, it's being.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yeah, that's beautifully said. I remember when I put in my original thesis topic, it was I wanted to do a phenomenology of wonder, and I used T.S. Eliot's poem where he talks about, the end of all arriving is to, or the end of all exploring is to arrive home and experience it again for the first time or something. And they told me I wasn't allowed to do this topic, and I had to do something else. So that was kind of the beginning of my exit.
Have you written it since?
No.
Well,
no,
then,
this last quarter in kind of engaging your class is literally the first time that I've gone back to the text. I've spent the last 10 years in doing this kind of ontological leadership type stuff where we're applying Heidegger in particular ways, but not actually gone back to the text. So
maybe to quote Andreas Hofer, who was a revolutionary in South Tyrol in northern Italy, es ist Zeit. It's time.
It's time.
It's time, which is an allotment. It's come now to write that what wasn't supposed to be written, not out of spite, but out of an increased sense of wonder and a sense of necessity, as it's recurring, right? And when it recurs, it bugs us. So it's this incompleteness with which we started. So perhaps it's time.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. So this is kind of in a different vein, but I found this quote from Seneca that he says that, let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of... let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. Let us balance life's books each day. The one who puts the finishing touches on their life each day is never short of time. So it's our relationship to death that allows us to always be with time.
Excellent. One last quote, also from Seneca. Ducunt fata volentem nolentem trahunt. Fate will lead those who are willing, but it will, drag along those who are not willing. Meaning, it will, drag them in the soil.
I love that. I love that because the only other topic that I thought was interested to talk about today was the amor fati. That kind of that the memento mori allows for this amor fati, this kind of love of fate.
Okay, that's something we'll explore some other time then.
Okay,
we'll go into amor fati.
Okay,
I have an idea for that. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.